Hey everyone, how you doing tonight? Wazoo here with Wazoo Web Bytes, and this is another jam-packed episode. Yep, this is going to be a fun one. I know I say that all the time, but this time I mean it. Hope you're having a good day or evening wherever you are, and maybe in my own way I'm helping you break out of tutorial jail, where you get stuck. In that vein, I think this is going to be a really cool idea. It hit me while having some Thanksgiving dinner, and yeah, I'm excited. I think this will be a really neat project for us to go through. So before we jump into any code, let's go through a demo and see what we're going to be building today. So as you can see, I've got a React app up and running called Task App. Yep, really creative. It's a application to generate tasks that you'll have to do. And it's sort of I'm meaning it as a next level from a to-do. So to-do, you just create we've done a few of these on my channel here before, but you create a to-do, you edit it, update it, delete it, or you can mark it as completed, and that's pretty much it. But what I'm kind of envisioning with this is that you're sort of wanting to create and track an actual task, something a little bit bigger than a to-do. So let's say, cleaning your basement, or getting your yard ready for the winter, or getting new equipment for some kind of new sport, whatever. So maybe this will be a way that you can help track it out. So as you can see, we've got a list of existing tasks that are in the system. They each have a status. I think I came up with 3 statuses: backlog, doing, and done. So fairly similar to like a Kanban board if you're familiar with working with those. And as you can see, I've got some existing tasks here, and we can go in and edit them. Generated task 1, status of backlog. So let's just call this, updated task 1. And we are moving into the status of doing. We'll hit update, and it makes a request to the server. And then if we go back home, we should see updated task 1, and it's doing. So we've got a backend server built in with Java Spring Boot, and we have a React 18 up and running for the front end for this JavaScript. And I've got one more really cool thing to show you. I've got Discord up and running. And what we're going to be able to do is type in bang task, create a Discord item, and we get a status response that we've created a Discord item. And let's go to the website. We'll refresh it, and now the new one has appeared that we just entered through our Discord bot. So we're going to be adding this to our project today. We're going to be putting together the entire server from scratch. We're going to be generating the React project that we can stuff inside our Spring Boot server. And then to top it all off, we're going to be looking at creating a Discord bot and attaching it into the same Spring Boot server. I think this is going to be really cool. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm really hoping you enjoy this episode. Make sure to use the chapter timestamps down below. Links for everything will be in the description. Feel free to jump around the video to get to the section that you're most interested in. All right, let's get going. So first things first, we're going to be looking at start.spring.io. This is the Spring initializer page that we visited so often before whenever we create a new project. So we're back here again. So we're going to be creating a Maven project, making sure to select Java. We'll be using version 2.7.4. And we can leave this group pom.xml the same, and let's just call this one Spring Boot Task Application. Maybe I'll put with API application, because we're going to be wrapping our own. Oops, maybe that's too long. Okay, Spring Boot Task Application. All right. And let's see, we've got everything set up. Okay, we want a jar file, and we want to be using, I want to be using Java 19. You can use 17 or 19. I think that's either of them are fine. Okay, so let's add some dependencies here. So let's do some Spring Web, and we'll add some Spring Security, and we'll add Spring Data JPA. We'll be adding H2. We'll be adding Timeleaf. We're not going to be using Timeleaf, but we just we need it for the for setting up the HTML page. Everything looks right. Let's hit the generate button and download it and extract it to your favorite project directory. Okay, as you can see, we are in Trello right now. Let's put together our own small sort of Kanban to organize this application a little bit, just because there's a few moving pieces. So let's see. I'll create my own. I'll make this really meta. We're building a Trello app with the same lanes, status lanes that we want to build into our task manager. Okay, so we've got a backlog lane, we've got a doing, and we've got a done. Okay, so let's see. For backyard, we want to or backlog, not backyard. We want to build generate server project. That's pretty much in the doing. Okay, and let's cancel that out. Okay, so then we've also want to do a create task resource, and then what we want to do is put together task CRUD operations. So that's things like let's open this up. That's things like adding the ability to get all tasks that are in the system, to get a single one, update a single task, and create a new task. Okay, and we want to put this together. We want to make sure that this is all behind an API. So make sure it's part of an API. So we want to do this task creation management through, well, not just the creation, but all task management through an API, and that'll allow us to do things like query it from the front end, from React, as well as work with it from the Discord bot. So then we want to create the React project. Later on, we want to create the Discord pieces, and let's see, we want to make sure I'm trying to think of what other pieces we need. We want to make sure that we update the server to package together the React front end in Maven, and we want to add environment support to our Spring Boot server. And I'll go through what all these things are meaning once we get there. But I think that's about it for now. So yeah, hopefully that's legible, and let's get back to working on the server now that we've kind of got a small game plan together. And we've got our basic project, our basic Spring Boot project set up. So I think we can, well, maybe we'll set up the database within our application properties first. Okay, so let's do our standard H2 data source. Let's go into application properties, and let me just check how that's looking. Oh, that's pretty small. Okay, let me set up the font. Okay, that should be big enough. Let's shrink that down. Okay, and then let's define a server port. And by default it's 8080. We'll just leave it at the default for now, but we'll be changing that later on. And I think that's all we need to worry about for the moment. Let's go ahead and start the server just to make sure everything kind of runs. Okay, the console looks happy. Yep, things are up and running. Spring Security will likely block us on our very first attempt of accessing the server, so let's just, we'll worry about that as we set everything up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a task model, and we've done this through several videos, but let's make sure we go through it again. So in our source main Java folder in the com.example.springboot task application, let's make a new package and just call it models. And then we'll be creating a new model, a new Java class, just called task. Okay, and we want to give it the annotation of entity, of getter, setter, to string, and required args constructor. And these are just helper annotations that Spring Boot can, it allows Spring Boot to just kind of fill in things for us, all of the boilerplate stuff for a class where we don't need to worry about them. And it keeps our class looking a lot cleaner and a lot easier to navigate. Serializable. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. Hooray. Okay. So what now we're going to do is we're going to be using the @ID annotation and the @generated value. And for a strategy, we're going to be using just generation type auto. And we'll just be doing a private long ID. This will be the ID of the task, and then each task will have a description, and then each task will have a task status, which will be an enum. We'll create that in a second here. Let's just finish this task, or finish this model, sorry. And then we'll be using private local date time for created at, a created at field, and a private local date time for updated at. And let's fill these in. Okay, so it'll ask us here. We can highlight it, create enum task status. And you know what, let's just do it by hand, because sometimes I don't trust what's going to happen during a live demo, live recording demo. Okay, so we want a public enum of task status, and we'll just be using, I use 3 for right now: backlog, doing, and done. Really straightforward. Okay, and then back in our task, let's make all these red lines go away. And I think that's all we're going to need right now. So let's fill out a repository for this, which is our interface with Java Spring Boot from our model to our database. So let's, again, back in the parent directory of com.example.springboot task application, let's create a new package. We'll call it repositories. And we'll just create a new class called task repository. And it'll be an interface. And use the annotation of repository. And we're going to be extending the CRUD repository, and we'll give it a hash map of task and long. So let's do that right now. We'll just resolve all of these red lines, and that's all we need. We've got our repository set up. Cool. And then now we're going to make a task service, and this will just be like a helper service to handle interfacing with the task repository, and that'll make it easier to use throughout our web service as well as our seed, database seed command line runner that we'll be creating here shortly. So back in the parent folder, let's create a new package, and we shall call it services. And within the services package, let's create a new Java class and call it task service. Okay, we'll give it an annotation of service. And what we're going to do is throw in a auto-wired annotation and create a link back to our repository, task repository. Pretty cool. Let's resolve these lines here. Okay. And then what we're going to need, okay, so the first function we're going to create is the getAll function. So we're going to be creating it as a public method that returns a iterable collection of task, and we'll just call this getAll, and we shall return task repository find all. Pretty cool. And then what we're going to do is we'll be doing a optional task call, so get by ID. So it may, this is the best way to request this from the repository because the record may or may not exist. And so let's return task repository find by ID, ID. And we'll resolve this up here. Okay, great. Now what we're going to do is create a save helper method. So let's do a public. We'll return the task that we've saved once we're through with this method. So we'll take in as input. We'll take a task, and so if the task has no ID, if it's null, it means it's a brand new task that we're trying to create. So let's set the created at to be local date time now. And this will just give us a timestamp of the very current moment this code is executing. So otherwise, or not otherwise, but once we drop out of that if condition, we then set the updated at. So no matter if this is a new one or if this is one that we're updating, we'll set the updated at fields to be right now as well. And then we'll return a task repository save of this current task item. Nice. Okay, then we'll be creating, the final method we'll create is a delete method. So let's do a delete function. We'll be passing in an ID and task I'll spell it correctly. Task repository delete by ID, ID. And that is all we need right now. And then just for fun, let's create a, I recommend getting rid of this before you put this into anything like production. But let's create a delete all helper. Delete all. And I'll show you shortly why we're doing this. So now what we're going to do is create what's called a seed loader. So we've done this in our to-do application, but basically what we're going to be doing is creating when the application starts up, it's going to empty the database and then pre-populate it with a few records that we can use for testing. And this is in most server kind of lingo, this is called seed files. So within our, again, back in our com.example.springboot task application, let's create a new folder. We'll call it config, a new package. And within that, we'll just call this one, whoops, we'll call this one seed data loader. So we're going to be using the annotation of component. That way Spring Boot will load it up into memory and try to execute it right away. And we're going to be implementing the command line runner. Whoops, runner. So we have to use the auto-wired annotation again, and we're going to be pulling in our task service that we just created. And this will help us pre-populate the database with some existing task items. So what we need to do is override a specific method of command line runner, which is run. Oops, 1, 2, 3 args, and it throws an exception. and we're going to call the method load seed data. And then down here, private void load seed data. So first things first, we are going to delete all the records. And then now let's create a new record. So task1 equals new task. Task1 set description generated task1. And then task1 set status, task status backlog maybe. And we'll create, let's import these classes, make sure that everything's found. Okay. And then we'll create another one, a second task, task2 equals new task. Task2 set description, another generated task. And this time we will set the status just to prove that our logic is kind of working here. We'll use the task status of doing. And then finally we will use the service to save both of these. So save task1 and then task service save task2. Alright, so now we've got two records that are populated by our seed function, our seed runner here, which will upon startup it'll delete all the records in the database in order to give us a clean sheet to work with, so to say, and then pre-populate it with these two tasks. Okay, so now what we're going to do is set up a very basic security configuration, and this will just let us continue on with a lot of this testing that we're going to be doing here. So in the config package again, let's create a new Java class and call it WebSecurityConfig. And we'll be using the annotations enable web security as well as enable global method security. And we'll be using some helper flags in here called pre-post enabled equals true and secured enabled equals true. Okay, let's resolve these warnings here. Okay, and then we're going to be injecting a Java bean of a security filter chain. And this is our way of telling Java security what's permitted and what to block in terms of type of requests, type of paths to ignore or to allow, etc. So we take in a HTTP and it throws, I think it just throws an exception. And let's resolve these again, just so we know what we're working with here. Okay, so what we want to do is we'll call the cores function and we'll AND it with, and we'll declare some headers, or we'll call the headers function, sorry. Frame options, deny, and we'll authorize all of the requests. This is the important one. That way we can allow Java Security to give us a recognition of of what is trying to come into our servers. Sorry, ant matchers, and we're going to have a slash permit all ant matchers slash API slash v1 slash tasks. We want to permit all. Okay, and then we want to return HTTP build. And let's see here now. Okay, we're still in the function. Good. And then the last thing we need to do is just set up cores. And this will be a way of helping your server respond to requests that are made from not only this server. So in other words, like if you have it on your own internal network, let's say you set this up on a Raspberry Pi or some other machine in your network, and you start the server up and running, then it'd be cool and needed, you'll have to do it, in order to make requests from another machine, another browser in your network to communicate with this server that's running. So we'll declare it as another Java bean, and it'll be a web MVC configurer. That's what we'll need to return. We'll call it just cores configurer. And then what we'll want to do is return add cores mappings let's see here. Return new web MVC configurer. And within that, we want to override public void add cores mappings. And we're passing in something called a cores registry. And this is just something that you only have to do once. And you may not even need to do it for your environment, your server. So if this is here, if you need to use it, throw it in. If you find that once you have your project up and running, you no longer need this, then you can easily just take it out. So allowed origins, we can use star for now. And allowed methods, we're going to allow get, put, basically all of the CRUD operations that we're going to need to support from our API. So post, delete, options, and head. Okay, and let's go ahead and resolve these red lines. Return, okay, that all looks correct. Now we can start the server. Let's get it. Oh, wait. We forgot one more thing. We need to put in a default controller. Well, we can still start it up, but it won't really do anything. Okay, so back in our package root here, we'll create a new package. We'll call it controllers, and we'll create a new controller called SPAController, single page application. And so what this will do is this will force, we need to use the controller annotation, and this will force every no matter what's on the location bar of the browser, it'll redirect it to the root of your application where the JavaScript app will pick everything up. So we're going to be using the @getMapping annotation with a value of /*, squiggly path, square bracket, and you won't need to memorize this, don't worry. Well, all this is doing is this is just going through all of your URL, including your parameters and paths, and just making sure that everything is just getting redirected back to the root page where your React app will be listening. Okay, so we're going to be returning a forward to root, so forward to / there, and that should be everything we need. We've got our SPA controller, we've got our task set up, we've got a repository, we've got our service, we've got our C data loader, and I think that is a really great place to start this up. So let's go ahead and start things up and just make sure there's no instant errors coming through in the console. Whoop, there's one error. Oh, right. Okay. So we've got an error here. Fix this pattern in your application. So we're trying to use an older style of matching the path passed into the URLs called ant path matching. That's sort of what Spring Boot used to call it before. So in your application.properties, we need to set a new property here called spring.mvc.pathmatch.matching strategy is ant path matcher, and this is basically enabling the legacy rules of pattern matching with ant path. That's a lot of and path in the same words. But basically, going forward in Spring Boot, so version 3 and up, they're going to be using a new way of going through and testing the paths that you're trying to process on the server. So we'll have to go into that once 3.0 becomes final. But for now, we can make use of the ant path matcher, just so we can keep going. Okay, so let's start this thing again. And it should start up without any issue. Okay, it does. And we won't see anything. Even if we try and hit this through the browser, it'll just return the familiar white label error page. So I guess we can double check that. So we can do HTTP localhost 8080. And we get our familiar white label error page. So far so good. That's actually a good sign that things are up and running. Okay, so let's go back to our Trello board, and we've now generated the server project for the most part. So now what we're going to do is we are going to, we also created the task resource. Let's actually put together some CRUD operations. So let's put together a web service. Let's go back into our Java. And then that'll be easier. It'll make it easier to verify and validate our front end as we develop that. So in the controllers, let's go ahead and stop that, make sure it's stopped. And I'm just going to commit. Okay, so let's set up another controller here. And these will handle our REST operations from basically through our API. So let's create a new Java class, and we'll call this Taskontroller. And we're going to be using the annotation of REST controller, because we're not going to be returning any front end, any redirect to a front end, anything like that. We're just creating a simple web service to handle the CRUD operations of interacting with our tasks. So let's now use a request mapping of /API/v1 tasks. Okay, so first what we're going to do is let's add logger support so we can log our methods out in our console here, in our Java console as we start running. And then we'll use the auto-wired annotation, and we'll pull in our task service that we've put together. And then we'll create a, let's just import that class. We'll get that up and running. And then let's create the get all. So the get mapping will have a public, it'll return an iterable collection of task. And we'll just call this function get tasks. And then we'll put a debug statement here just saying task controller get tasks, just so we can follow along in the console. And then we'll return task service get all. Pretty easy peasy. Okay, and then we're going to do a get a single one. So get mapping /ID. And then what we want to do is it'll be an optional. We have to wrap it in an optional because we don't know if that task exists in the database or not. And we'll be passing in a path variable, which is a long, which will be our ID. And let's go ahead and create a debug statement here. Resc task controller get task by ID. And let's make a note of the ID. And then let's call our task service optional task equals task service get by ID, and we'll return the optional task. Nice. Okay. And then another easy one will be deleting. So let's create a @delete mapping. And again, we'll be passing in an ID on the parameters. And let's call this, whoops, if I could type, that would be really helpful. Public void delete task. And we'll be giving it a path variable of long ID. And we'll just give this one rest task controller delete task by ID. And we'll just use ID and task service. We'll call the task service and we'll delete the ID, the given ID. Okay, so now let's do a fun one. Let's create a new task in the system. So we're going to be making use of the post mapping, at post mapping, to the root, so /API/v1/tasks. Okay, and let's call this public. We'll return a task, like we'll return the new task that was created. So create new task. So we are going to be making use of the request body, so the JSON payload that comes into the web service, which will be of type task. So let's go ahead and log that out. So log debugger, logger.debug, rest task controller, create a task, and we'll use the squiggly method of injecting the new task object into that string, which will then call the toString method on that object, which will then spit it out into our debug console. So let's use task. We'll create a new task, and then we'll set the description to be from the new task that we're pulling in. Okay, and then we'll set the status to be the new task get status. And then we'll use the task service to just save this new task, and it'll return the newly created one from the database, which we will then turn around and return back to the caller, so to the browser. And yeah, finally we will update our item. So this will be a @put mapping /ID. And then what we're going to be doing is we'll return whatever task we end up updating. So we'll be taking in a path variable as well as what's in the request body. So let's spit out some debug messages. So rest task controller update task, and then maybe in square brackets we'll display the task ID that we're passing in, and then we'll pass the parameters that we're trying to work with. So ID and new task. Okay, so first of all we have to query our database to see if that task exists in the server. So task service get by ID, and then we'll use the given ID. And then we'll create a new empty task. You'll see why in a second here. So if optional task is present, so if there's something in that optional container, then we're pretty confident that it's the actual object from the database. So we'll assign task to be optional task get. So we'll remove it from the optional container, optional wrapper, however you want to say that, and we'll set the description from the new task get description, and we'll set the status from new task get status, and then we will assign it to whatever comes back from task service save, which should be the newly saved task. And then what we want to do is return it. So I've done it this way, I've structured it this way because it is possible that we are trying to request an update and update a task that doesn't exist in the system. So when we get to this line here and we try to we try to reference the whatever object is returned from querying the database, querying the service which queries the database of the given task ID. And so if it exists, then we make use of it, we update it as we've done before, and then we use the same task service to save it back to the database. If it doesn't exist, then we just return the empty task that we created. So that'll kind of give the client a hint that it didn't exist. We could return some better error handling. We could return a more helpful error message stating that that the task wasn't found. And we can maybe do things that way if that's not going to work. We can set this up to properly return a response entity, and we'll use what's called a question mark. So basically it's like a wildcard. And then this way we can so we can return new response entity of, let's just call it a task, and then we will use the task as well as HTTP status OK if our task is present, and let's just put that within our HTTP status is OK, and otherwise let's just do an else right here. So return new. This kind of looks a little weird, but it's a way of let's see, we can call it an error. Actually, we'll just use the status right here. HTTP status not found. Is there a not found? There we go. 404 not found. Okay, maybe that's a little bit more proper if we're designing this as an API. Nice. Okay, so if our task is CRUD, we don't need that one. Here, let's just clean this up a little bit. Okay, so if our task, I guess we can replace the argument here. Okay, so if our task exists, if it's present, and we've pulled it from the service, we can work with it, update the description, update the status, save it back to the database, and then return it back to the client along with an HTTP status OK. And if we don't find it in the database, then we just return a 404. So it wasn't found. Let's see, do we need to do anything here? We can return a response entity. Let's see this, and then we shall return new response entity, and from the create method, so we can return a new response entity of the task and an HTTP status created. So this is a hint for the caller that we've generated a new object in our system with our post mapping. Okay, so that all looks good. Open up Trello. We've put together the CRUD operations. So now let's go in and let's create the React project. Moving along. Let's drop to our terminal. Boot task application. And let's go into let's really blow this up. So let's go into source, main. Okay, and so we've got a folder called Java. We're at the level of the application where we've got the Java folder and resource folder. And this is where, of course, our Java code sits and where the resources and templates and all that sit for when we're working with TimeLeaf. So within this folder, what we want to do is make sure that you've got Node and NPM installed. You'll have to take care of that outside of this video. Just for reference, I am using NPM version 8.15.0 and Node version 16.17.1, which is the latest LTS as of recording this video. So what we want to do is type in npm install -g create React app. And this will just pull down the create React app helper function. Well, not function, but basically CLI tool, and make it available globally for all of your JavaScript projects. And then what we want to do is create React app front end. And it'll tell you it's now creating a new React app in Spring Boot task application /source/main/frontend. Okay, and then it'll install all of the necessary React components. Okay, so we've got our project created. Let's go into it now. So cd frontend. cd frontend. And then what we want to do is we want to add another package called React Router DOM. So npm install React Router DOM, as well as Bootstrap. We'll be making use of the Bootstrap CSS. So Bootstrap -- save. So it'll go back out again and pull down the React Router DOM and Bootstrap packages. Okay, good. And so then if we do a npm start right in the front end folder, it'll then run the necessary create React app setup stuff and automatically open a browser window. And it'll be the default React page, which is the spinning React logo and this text here: edit source app.js and save to reload, learn React. Cool. So this part is all working correctly. So let's Control C that to close it down. And then let's go into the code base and take care of the rest. Okay, so in the front end folder, is it all happy now? Okay, it should be good. So in the source, the front end source index.js, what we want to do is first import browser router from React Router DOM. Okay, and then in this root render method here, we've got react.strict_mode, and then we're going to be surrounding the app tag with browser router. And this will help make it easier to do the necessary routing that we're going to have in our application, the light routing that we'll have in our application. So we've got it surrounding our app, and this is all we need for this page now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into app.js, and let's clean out everything within header. We don't need that anymore. Actually, let's even clean out header. And so this will be sort of the entry point, the main entry point of our application. So we're going to use the empty angled brackets, which is basically a in earlier versions of React, this was called a React fragment. Eventually, we're going to be putting in a navbar here, some CSS for a navbar, as well as some routes. So let's set up some routes right now with React Router DOM. So we need to create a beginning and end tag for routes, and then let's create a home path. So path equals /, and we'll give it an element, and we'll just call it home. And we'll end this off. And that'll be everything we do for now. Let's spice up this application function declaration here. We'll use the arrow syntax for JavaScript, and we'll export the default app. Okay, everything looks good there. We won't be importing the logo from logo CSV. We won't be importing the app CSS, but we will be importing the Bootstrap CSS. So Bootstrap /dist/css /bootstrap.min.css. And then we want to import routes from React Router DOM, and we want to import home from home, which we haven't yet created. And I think that's all we need right here. So let's erase this app.css. It was generated for us from create React app. And let's erase index.css while we're at it, because we're just going to let Bootstrap handle our styling for now. You can always add it back if you feel you want your own custom styling, no problem. So let's also delete logo.svg. We're not going to be using it. Okay, and then let's create a new file, and we will just call it home.js. Okay, so eventually this is where we're going to display all of our task items. But for now, we'll just make this an empty component. So using the arrow function, the arrow handling, or not the arrow handling, the arrow declaration of JavaScript will return. We'll have another React fragment here. And let's just create a div. And then this is where we'll put the list of tasks. But for now, we'll just use an H1 just so that we can test that we're entering our pages okay. And then we want to export default home. Okay, that all looks good. And remember, in our index, well, or in our app, sorry, we've got our routes. And then we wanted a navbar. So up above routes is where I stuck the navbar, my navbar component. And let's just quickly create that now. Import navbar from navbar, which we will create. So create source new file. Hopefully I'm not moving too quickly here. I'll make sure I go slowly. Now this one is going to be a cut and paste of a big blob of HTML, and this is just the same HTML that if you go to the Bootstrap page, there'll be a lot of like sample snippets for navbar, for basically all of their widgets that the Bootstrap CSS provides. So I've taken it straight from there. So let's Control V. So yeah, so it's a big blob of HTML. So let's walk through it. So we're going to be returning an empty React fragment, and then inside that we'll have our nav. This is where I've placed all the nav code. So we've got a nav element, and we've got a container within it, and our proper navbar brand name. I've given this a class of navbar brand. I've given this app name just task app. You can call it anything you want. And I'll explain it here in a second, but the link tags are special to React Router DOM. So they're helper methods. It's kind of like the link to helper method in Rails, if you're familiar with that. But in here, it's a helper method of creating new ahref, so anchor links. It's a helper method for generating those. So we've got one here for a default route of slash. So when we click home, it'll just go to the home page. And then we've got another one set up here to slash task slash new when we want to create a new task. So we won't worry about that one just yet. But let's get this up and running again. So back to our command window, our terminal window. Let's type in npm start again. And it should, great. So we've got a task, our task app navbar, and a list of tasks. And we don't have the home, or let's see if there's any error. No, there's no error. We don't have the home. It's interesting that we don't have the home link or anything like that set up yet. But we shall go in and fix that. So back in our server. So here we've got our home component, which just displays an H1 right now of tasks. So let's actually drop in a new component that we'll create here. And we'll just call it Tasklist. And then at the top there, we'll just import Tasklist from .tasklist, which we will create right now. So let's create a new file in the source folder. We'll call it tasklist.js. And this will be a table that we will populate with the elements from all of our tasks that are in the database that are available through the service. Okay, so const tasklist equals, making use of the arrow function. Okay, so now we're going to define a list and set list. So we're going to be using useState. And we're going to be initializing list by default to an empty array. And then the way of declaring setList here is with the way that React useState works is that we can now use setList to populate list. So we're basically setting up the helper method to set a setter method for the object or string or whatever thing that we're trying to track there. It'll become more apparent as we get going through this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to return the actual table. So we're going to return, and again we're going to be using an empty fragment here, and then we'll be using a table with class name of table and table striped, both from Bootstrap. And then let's set up the t-head section. Let's see, tr. What are we going to have in our tr? So let's display everything. So let's display the ID, the description, the status, and an action. So things like, if we want to edit or delete it. And then what we're going to do within tBody is we are going to put in a little bit of code here. We're going to take our list that we've declared above, and we are going to use map and work on each individual item. So basically we're iterating through our list of data, and we are going to return a row. So let's close that up here. So we've got and this is basically some JSX that we're going to be returning from this method here, and this will be the actual displaying of our task item. So we're going to have a TD column, and we'll be using the squigglies item ID. So basically they're helper methods to display the properties of the item object that we're iterating through in the list of data. And then the second one is description. The third one is our status, item.status. And then the fourth one, we can just leave it alone for now. We'll fill it in once we get data. Okay, so we've got a map which goes through and iterates through the list of data and then draws our table. So let's go ahead and start this up and just make sure that everything is at least pieced together properly for that. Export okay, I didn't export the component. So let's export default task list, and let's go back to the browser. Use state is not defined. Okay. Let's go back to the top here and let's import React use state from React. And let's try this again. Okay, so we've got a table here and it's empty because we don't have any data. And I see we've got some errors. That's okay, we'll fix this up. Okay, let's go back in our task list. Okay, so now what do we do to get the data? We've got the components set up to draw the data, but let's now create a way of fetching the data. So we can use another helper, another hook from React called useEffect. And useEffect is kind of a, for lack of a better description, it's kind of like a watch system. So you can set objects that you're monitoring, and if the state of those objects change, then you can do something to react to that change. In this case, what we want to do is use it to make a network call to our API to then pull all of the existing tasks from the database up through the API, up through the server, and back to the browser here to draw within the table. So let's create a useEffect, and let's use the arrow functionality here. And so we're going to make a method called getTasks, and from the response of what comes back from that, we are going to be setting the list to the response, basically. And then this is important. What we want to do is we want to use an empty array brackets for the dependency list that this use effect is tied to. So what this means is that this get task call will only be made, this use effect call, sorry, will only be made the very first time that this component is loaded and drawn to the screen. This is really handy for doing what we're trying to do right now, which is making API calls to the back end to fetch the data that we want to work with within this component. Okay, so we've got a method here called get tasks. So let's go ahead and actually create that. So I'm calling this a service. We'll call get tasks an actual service. So in the source file folder, let's create a new file and just call it services.js. We'll create a whole bunch of helper methods here, and we'll export function get tasks. And we'll be using the fetch API of JavaScript to do all this network stuff for us. So what we're going to do here is first let's do this the first way. So we're going to specify our server, so localhost 8080, and then /API/v1/tasks, and then the data that comes back, we want to call JSON on it, JSON, and then return that back from that process to the calling function, which is the task list. Okay, so let's import get tasks from services. So everything should be hunky-dory there. So let's make sure this is okay, so this is recompiled. Let's get back to our browser, and we now see our tasks coming from the back end. Generated task 1, backlog doing, along with the action and empty action column. Perfect. This is great. So it's working through our services correctly. So now you might notice that, or you will notice that what we did was I stopped the server because we're gonna need to restart it again shortly. So what I did is in the services we hard-coded the path to localhost 8080 in order to reference the API there. Now this is not the most ideal way to do this because you don't know. It is possible down the road that you're going to have different environments where this API might reside on, and you don't want to be hard coding a URL, a fully qualified URL like this in your application. So what we're going to do is we're going to shorten that down to API v1 tasks. Now, if we leave this as is, when React tries to make the call, when the browser tries to make the call, because we're listing on port, because React by default is on port, what, 9000? 3000. So because by default React is on port 3000, then it is going to try and resolve the API call to localhost 3000/API/v1/tasks, which is of course wrong. That's not where our server is listening. So what we need to do in order to help out React on this development side at least, is in our package.json file, we're going to be adding a tag at the very bottom, an entry, sorry, called proxy. So just type in proxy, and then we'll give it HTTP localhost 8080. So what this is going to do now is when we run it and our application makes the call, then NPM and React, between the two of them, they'll be smart enough to figure out that because we've got a proxy defined here, it'll prepend the API call with this domain, which will then talk to our Java server, and everything will be amazing. So let's go ahead and run it, and let's make sure that this works. Okay, so that's started up again. Let's go back to our browser. Our API call works without issue. Perfect. Okay, so what do we need to do here now? So now the next step is being able to view a single task from React. So let's create a action link here called edit, and when we click on edit, it's going to make a request to the API for this specific individual task, which it will then display on its own page. So let's go back into our app here. And while we're in the services, let's just create a getTask function here. So it's similar type of style. We're going to call it getTask, and we'll be passing in an ID. And then what we want to return is a fetch, and we'll be using the string interpolation helper methods, or well, not helper methods, string interpolation of JavaScript, which is the backtick, and we'll be referencing /API/v1/tasks/$ and then squiggly brackets ID. So JavaScript will insert the ID into this string when it comes across this. And then again, we're going to be returning the data and converting the data to JSON, and then returning that back to the caller. Okay, so we've got a get task, and then we need to set up a individual task. So back in our source folder again, in our JavaScript, let's create a new file and call it task.js. Import React, use state and use effect from React. And then we're going to import use params from React Router DOM. And then we're going to be importing the get task from services. Okay, and then let's create a task. So we're going to follow that same pattern that we did in our task list of having a data object here that we fill with our task item. But for now, it's going to be an empty. Well, we're going to initialize it to an empty object. And then we're going to have two fields in our form called description and status. So let's just call this description, and then we need a setter, so set description equals useState, and these will be strings, so an empty string. And then same thing with status. So const status, set status is useState, and then an empty string. And then we want to use get params, use params from React Router DOM. And what this will do is this will just return the entire parameters of our request. So that way we can fetch the ID that's on the URL. Okay, so first what we're going to do is we are going to create a use effect to fetch the specific data that we want, the specific task data that we want. So we've seen this before in the tasklist.js. We're going to be copying basically the same thing. So get task, and we're going to be referencing the ID from params. Then whatever comes back, we are going to call set data with that item. And this time, our dependencies are going to be params. So when the params object is updated, let's see here, params. So when the params object is updated, whenever the params object is updated, then it'll call this use effect, which is what we'll need when the component basically starts up. It's almost the same as leaving this empty for when it starts up, but I'm declaring params as a dependency just to make sure that we're waiting for, I don't know if there's any delay in this use params hook, but just in case there is, then we'll wait for this to finish up first before we call our use effect in order to reference the ID from the parameter. Okay, so then let's create a basic component here. So let's return. We'll use an empty fragment here. And then let's just create a div, class name of container. And then we'll just create another div, and we'll just give it a class name of task, just in case we ever want to style it. And then we're going to create an empty form here. And we'll use form group. And then we'll create a label for our description. So we're going to create a field to display description. Which will be a text control. So input class name equals form control. It's another Bootstrap class style. Our type of input element is text. And our ID is going to be description. And our value is going to be the value of our description string, our useState string. And our onChange method is going to be handle description, which we'll update here in 1 second. Okay, so we've got our description, and then we're going to cut and paste this, the whole surrounding div, and we're going to do the exact same thing for status. So we'll call this one status. Our description is going to be status, and our ID is going to be status. Our value is going to be status, and our onChange method is going to be handle status. So let's create these onChange listeners right now. And this is basically whenever the input field gets changed, it'll fire off that new key, like whatever the field is being updated to, into this method. So let's first define the handle status. So we're going to be getting an event passed to this. And all we need to do is call setStatus using the event, target, and value. So whatever's in that will populate the status string, the status useState string. And then we'll do the same thing for handle description. So set description, event, target, value. Okay. We won't put in a submit button just yet, and let's get this one just rendering something first. Let's see, what do we need? So back in our app.js, we've got our routes defined here. So let's create a new route, and we'll give it a path of /tasks :id. And then the element that will pass into React will be the task component. So let's import task from task. Now, if everything is up and running, I think we've left the router links the same. Let's check. Okay, we didn't. We left it as an empty. So back in our task list, when we are drawing our tasks items, let's create a link to, and we want to reference that same path that we just put into the app.js component. So let's use the backticks for the string, and let's call this tasks $item ID, because we want to use the ID of this task that we're drawing. And then we will give it a name of edit. So a hyperlink name of edit. Okay, so let's check all this out. This looks good. Whoops, wrong window. Server is up and running. Link is not defined. Okay, so import link from React router DOM. That should be all we need. Let's make sure there's no more errors. Okay, good. Let's go back to our browser. And we now get an edit action. So if we click this, if we notice the URL the resolving URL in the lower left corner there, I'll try and blow it up in the video, is /tasks/7. So let's hit edit, and it goes here. Let's see, is it making the request? Oh, we're not seeing any logging, and now I remembered why we're not seeing any logging. So stop the server. This will help us troubleshoot these service calls. So in our application.properties file, we can specify some logging methods or logging commands. So what we want to do is we want to set all of our application objects to use debug logging. So all we need to do is type in logging.level.com.example Spring Boot task application. So at the Spring Boot task application level, so everything underneath this root package will use the debug logging level. And then let's go ahead and start that back up. Okay, and then let's go back to the browser and let's refresh this. And then why won't this start here? Are we seeing, okay, so we're seeing the REST call get task by ID 7, okay. So maybe, oh, maybe because we've restarted the server, it's cleaned. You know what? So in our, let's stop the server, sorry, one more time. Let's stop the server. And then in that seed data loader, let's just comment out the load seed data call, so that we preserve, now we can preserve the data that's in the database while we're restarting things. So let's now go back and restart the server. So it should, whatever was existing there before, it should still be there. And let's go back to the browser and let's go back to the home, so we can just do that out. Okay, so now we've got generated task 1 and another generated task, but using ID 9 and 10. So that's why it wasn't working. So let's hit edit, and it should make a request to edit 9. Okay, so we don't see anything populating there, but we do see a REST task controller get task by ID 9. So it should be coming back to the component. And let's go into task and see if we can figure out why. So we are calling it task. We're calling the use effect, setting the data, and okay, I think I know why. So a workaround that I had to do is because we've got sort of a data object, which is what we're getting from the server, and then we've got a form object which is managing our updates in the form. I've kind of got two different pieces of data here that we're working with. So we're working with the status and description along with the data. Since we're defining the input elements to use the status and description, these aren't being updated when the data object is being updated. So we need one more use effect. And all we can do is, this one is really simple now, is so if data exists, so if there's anything in the data, then we want to set the description to be the data description, and then we want to set the status to be the data.status. And so the dependency on this use effect is going to be our data object itself. So we're going to request the data from the server, given the single ID from the parameters, and then it's going to be changing the data object using setData. And so once that data object changes, since we're referencing it here in our dependency list, it's then going to call this use effect, and it'll see that, okay, we've got a data object, and then we're going to set the description with the given data description and set the status with the given data status. So let's go back to our browser. And now we see our proper description and status for this task. So let's go back to the home page and let's click edit for the other one. And we see our status being updated and our description being updated. let's put a submit button there so that we can figure out, or so that we can submit the data back to the server whenever we want to create a new one or update an existing task. So to do that, let's just close this here. Okay, so to do that, let's put in a form button, a submit button right in that form there. Let's just semicolon there. Okay, so at the bottom there, underneath the second div, let's go ahead and create a submit button. Type equals submit, and then we'll give it a class name of button primary, and then we'll just call it update. That's what I gave the name for it for now. And so what we want to do is add a listener, an onSubmit listener on the form itself, and we'll just call this method handle submit. And right up here again, right underneath, maybe right under handle description, we'll handle submit equals event. And what we'll do is we will prevent the default on that event. Okay, so event prevent default, just so the page isn't being acting weird. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy let options equals data. So we're going to make a copy of the current data, and then we're going to update the status to equal status and the description to equal description. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to call we have two cases to handle here. So if we don't have an existing object, so if we're creating a brand new task item, then our ID is going to be null. And if our ID is populated, if we have an existing ID, it means that we've pulled that task from the server. So for the moment, we're going to just use the update method right here, or the update process. So if we have an existing data ID, so this maybe should be options. Let's check options. So if there's an ID in options, then we're going to call update task options ID, and then pass in our options themselves. And then with the response, we are just going to call set data on that response. Okay, and so then let's create a update task in our services. So what we're going to do is we're still going to be using the fetch API, export function update task, and we're going to be given an ID and some data. Okay, so we've got const options equals. The method we're going to be using is put. For headers, we just want to use content type of application JSON. Perfect. And then for our body, we're going to stringify, JSON stringify the data object, the data being passed into it. And then what we're going to do is, again, we're going to return fetch, and we're going to be going to API/v1/tasks/$ID, and we're going to be passing our options. And then with the data coming back, we're going to be just transforming it with data JSON before returning it back to the caller method. Okay, so back in our task.js, let's update this up here to reference update task. Okay, so let's see if this is going to work. So our server's running, okay, and then let's make sure our JavaScript, okay, our JavaScript server is running, everything looks okay there. And let's go back to our app, and let's just go Okay, so now we want to take the generated task, we want to update this one. So let's move our status from backlog to done and try and click update. And let's see, do we see our traffic on the server? Let's check the logging. Let's go to the bottom. Update task, okay. We're setting the status to done. Oh, perfect. So it's updated on the server. And then let's go back to the home page of our app. And we now see, oh, yep, we changed it to doing and it's now doing. Perfect. All right, this is really promising. Okay, so now what we need to do is fix the new link button in order to create a new task. So let's go back into our editor here and let's go to the Navbar. Okay, so now as you can see, we've got a home link and our new task link. So home, we'll just take us home. And then the new task link, you can see that the path goes to /tasks/new. So back in our router, if you recall in our, is it home? No, app? Yeah, so we've got our tasks and then our ID. So when our URL is /task/new, then what happens is instead of an ID, instead of it being a number, it's going to be interpreted as the word new. So in our task component here, remember when we were doing this in the handle submit, if the options has an ID, then we call update task. So what we need to do now is, if there's no ID, then we know that it's a brand new task item, and we can then call create task, which will send a post request. So we want to call create task, passing in options, and then we'll take the response and do the same thing. We'll call set data on that response. So then let's go ahead and let's create a create task function in our services file, which will make use of the post function. So let's call it export function create task, and we'll pass in some data, and our const options will be method. The HTTP method we're using is post. We're passing in the headers object of content type application JSON again. Application JSON. And then for our body, we're going to be calling JSON stringify the data. And then we're going to be doing the same fetch call here, except we're not passing in an ID, so it's just to tasks. Return fetch /API/v1/tasks, and then we're passing in our options, and then the response from that, we're going to be calling the JSON operation on them before handing it back to our task component. So let's double check that this works correctly as we're expecting. Okay, so we've got our service up and running, and let's create a new task. And let's see, oh, we're still making a call to /task_new. So what we need to do is, let's make a guard for that in our use effect, the one which fetches our data here. So if, before we call get task, so if params ID equals new, then just return, just get out of here. So this, we can easily just use params.id, but the question mark is kind of a optional, what's called an optional parameter. So if the params object exists and if it has the ID field. So this is using the question mark here in front of ID is the same thing as saying if params and params.id. So instead of using this this syntax of JavaScript. We can shorthand it now with question mark dot ID. Okay, so let's go back here and try that again. So task new. Let's reload the page, and okay, it's just a warning. We'll figure that out later. Let's set a new description. So new task description, and then a status of, let's say, backlog. And we'll call update. And let's check our server. And we've got a request here to create the task with new task description and status backlog. So let's go back here and go to home, and we now see our new task showing up. Back in our handle submit function, the other reason why I made a copy of data is that because if we change data, then all we're going to do is, remember, we've got a use effect down here tied into data. So if we change anything, if we change any property in the data object, then it'll fire off that use effect event. So we don't want that to happen, because all we want to do is make a copy of that data. Now what we have to do is package everything up properly. So let's hit stop. So now what's happening, as you might know, or as you might realize, is that we are running our npm server, React server, right from the source main frontend folder. And our Java stuff is back in the Java folder. And when it gets compiled, when the Java classes get compiled, they get compiled into this target folder. So it's basically like the dist or build folder that React uses for all the React stuff. So Java puts everything in this classes folder. Now, at the moment, nothing from the front end folder is making it into this target classes area. So when we want to build this application and package up our Spring Boot server into a jar file that we can drop on a server, it won't have any of the front end components with it. So let's go ahead and fix that. What we need to do is within the Maven file, the pom.xml, which is the Maven file, whenever we trigger a build using the Maven build, then we want it to basically use npm to build our front-end work and then copy it into this target folder. So that's what we're going to set up right now. So if you go into the pom.xml file, this is going to be a ton of XML, by the way. Just warning you in advance. So let's go down to the build section, and underneath in the build section, let's set a directory here of project basedir /target. Okay, and then let's scroll further down until we get after that Lombok exclude plugin. Now we're going to be making use of another plugin, and it is a fantastic one for working with JavaScript. So its group ID is com.github.irslet, and then the artifact ID is going to be frontend Maven plugin, and then for a version we're going to be using 1.12.1, which is the latest version as of this recording. And then for a configuration, we are going to set a working directory of source main frontend and a install directory of target. Okay, and then so what we're going to now do is set up some executions. So basically some tasks to run through. And our first one is going to be to install Node and npm. So install Node and npm. For the ID, we can pretty much call it whatever we want. But for the goals, we have to use a very set a very strict, convention here. Install node and npm. And then the configuration for those goals is node version, remember 16.17.1, and then an npm version of 8.15.0. And then once that execution completes, so once it pulls down npm, node and npm, well, just npm basically. Well, I guess it has to install both. So once it installs node and npm, then we want to call npm install to get our React libraries. So we have another set of goals here. Goal of npm, and then a configuration of install. So it will call npm install, and then we want to create another execution for npm run build. So execution, we'll give this one an ID of npm run build. For goals, we want to set up a goal of npm again. And then for configuration, we want to pass in some arguments, run build. And then what we need to do is handle that file copying, which I was mentioning before. So let's go down to the next plugin section and create an empty plugin. And we'll specify an artifact ID of Maven and run plugin. And then we'll create an executions list or section, and then another execution section, and then we'll specify a phase. So there's certain phases in the life cycle of a Maven file, and right now it's not really important going into that. This is just a phase. The generate resources phase is just a piece of that life cycle which is responsible for packaging up and compiling all of your classes. So we're going to just hook into that phase and use it to then make this file copy of our JavaScript project over to our target folder for the Java. Okay, so phase. So we need to set up another configuration, and we want to set up a target and use copy. And we want to specify project build directory / so the to dir, so where we're copying it to is our build directory / classes / static. And then we're going to specify a file set of project baster / source / main / frontend / build static. That just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Okay. And then we're going to set up another copy. To dir equals $ project build directory / classes / static. And then another file set, dir equals project baster source main frontend build. So we're taking the static, what's in the static folder, and we're copying that we're copying the contents of the front end build static folder into the classes static folder, and We're also copying the contents of the source main front-end build folder. And then underneath configuration, we just want to put in a goals section here again of run. And that's all we need to do. Okay, so let's test it out. So let's drop to our command line here and let's type in, let's go to the root of the project. Okay, and then let's just type in, mvnw spring boot :run. So it should do all the work now of packaging up. You can see here, okay, it's already installed Node, it's installing npm, and then it is, if the Node modules is detected, then it won't, I don't think it'll run it again, otherwise it'll call in npm install. And you can see now it's called React scripts build. And once it finishes that, it'll then copy those files and folders over to the target directory. And then now it's going through the Java side and doing the same thing for Java. And then now it has finished and it's running. So it's now running on port 8080. So if we reference localhost 8080, we should see our React app now properly being called from our application. And so we can use edit, go into it, and we can create a new task. And yeah, that's fantastic. So we've set up a way for it to be included in a build whenever we want to package up our server. And okay, so we've created the React project. We've just finished updating the server to package together the React frontend and Maven. Okay, okay, so we want to add environment support to our Spring Boot server. Okay, so this will come important, especially when we tackle the Discord pieces of this application. So let's go back in our pom.xml, and we're going to be making use of a library called spring.env. So in your dependency list, let's scroll up here to our dependencies. Let's see, right after the last one, let's add a new one in. It's the group ID is me.paulschwartz, and the artifact ID is spring.env. Now, the idea of environment files is that maybe this will be addressed in Spring Boot 3, the upcoming Spring Boot 3.0. But right now, you've got a application properties sort of hierarchy. So we can create different application property files for the different environments that we want to run our server in. But the one drawback is that we don't want to, there's certain properties in our application properties file that we don't want to commit to source control. So let's say when we get to Discord, we're going to be using a key, an auth key from the Discord server. So we want to make sure that we don't check that into source control, because then it's a real security risk if your project gets if someone's able to access your source code on Git, then they'll be able to just take the keys and then do whatever they want with your application, whether it's on Discord or any other kind of service that you're making use of in your application. So to fix that, we can still maintain flexibility in the server, but be able to pass in environment variables when we're running our environment. So one way to do this in the root of the project is to create a file called .env, and it's basically a file that never gets committed to source control. So make sure to add it to your git ignore, or not git, sorry, that was stupid. .env, there we go. adding it to your gitignore file so that you don't accidentally commit it. And then what we want to do is let's set up a port here just to make sure that things are being read correctly. We can call it port 3000. And then back in our application properties, we can reference $env.port. Okay, so that when the server starts up, it'll look for an environment variable called port, which will have it in our .env file, which will never get committed into source control. So this is really handy when you want to run this on different servers. You can just specify different environment variables to control anything you want without, if you structure it properly like this, then you don't need to rebuild anything if you want to just change some aspects of the running application. Okay, so let's start this up and just test that everything is resolving correctly. Okay, so it should say starting Spring Boot server on port 3000. And there we see Tomcat started on port 3000. Very cool. Okay, let's hit stop and let's just change the environment variable here back to 8080. And then if we start up again, we should see server starting up on port 8080. There we go. Okay, very cool. Let's go back to our Trello board. Okay, so we want to add environment support, so we fixed that up. Okay, now the final piece. Let's get to Discord. Let's create a Discord bot that will then listen for a command, and then it'll go to the server, create a new task for us, and pull a response back to the server. So with the server stopped, let's go back into the pom.xml file, and underneath this dependency we just added for the .env, let's add one more dependency, and it's for a Discord set of Java classes called Javacord. Okay, so it's the group ID of org.javacord, artifact ID Javacord, version 3.5.0 as of recording this video, and we'll use a type of pom. Okay, and so if you go to discord.com/developers/applications, this will show a list of all of your applications, provided you've signed up with a Discord account, of course. It's an easy process, took like 5 minutes. All you need is an email. It's free. You don't need to pay anything or enter any credit card. And it's a simple chat tool that you can use if you're not familiar with Discord. But at any rate, so use this URL to get into the developer section. Okay, let's make that a little bigger, and then let's create a new application that we'll be using. So hit the new application button, and then for a name, just give it a name. So let's call it Spring Boot. And I've already used TaskBot, so let's try. We can just call it Spring TaskBot. How about that? And then hit the Agree Terms of Service Agreement checkbox, and then hit Create. And then it'll do its thing. So we've now called it the Spring TaskBot, and it'll give us an application ID, public key. We don't need to really know that for now. I mean, it's important stuff, of course, but we don't really need to write it down or anything. And then in the bot section, we want to click on the Add Bot button, and it'll say, do you want to add a bot to this app? Yes, do it. Okay, so a new bot has appeared, and so the username of the bot is now Spring Task Bot. We've got an authorization flow, and then here under the section where it says Public Bot, public bots can be added by anyone. When unchecked, only you can join this bot to servers. So for now, let's uncheck this and hit the Save Changes button. And then further down, we also need to turn on Message Content Intent and save changes again. and I'm not going to worry about the bot permissions for the moment. So this sets everything up in Discord, on the website at least, on the developer site. And then what we're going to do is there's an OAuth, you'll see an OAuth section here, and it's going to have us authenticate and then add it to our Discord server. So in the URL generator, so what we want to do is we have to identify a scope, and so we at least want a bot permission, so make sure you tick the bot box. And then for text permissions, we want to send messages, embed links, attach files, allow permission for that, mention everyone, well, we don't use that, use external emojis, add reactions, use slash commands. I'm wondering if that is it. We're not working with webhooks at the moment. We don't want to do any member management. We don't want to manage any channels. So I think that's it. I think that's all we need are these text permissions. Okay, and then if you go down to the generated URL, this is a URL that gets generated, and we open up in a new browser tab and we go to that URL, and then it'll say, do we want to add the bot to our own server? And so I've created a server beforehand, but again, if you look on Discord, you can add a new server, create your own, and then you can use for me and my friends, and then give it a server name, and then hit create. So assuming you've already done that, I'm going to be adding it to this server here. I want to select Wazoo server because that's my own private server, and hit continue, and then it'll verify the permissions that I want to allow it, and I want to hit yes, so I hit authorize, and then pass the human test, and then we can close this browser window. We don't need this URL thing anymore, and we'll be needing the token shortly here. So for now, just leave this page here as it is, and you should see in Discord a welcome Spring Task bot. That's the new bot that we've generated. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, let's expand that text a little bit. Okay, so welcome Spring Task bot, and you'll notice that it's now showing up in the offline section, so it's offline. And so we need to, in order to work with the bot, of course, we have to bring it online in order to respond to any of our text commands. So let's go back into our Java code. And then we've got this Java module, Javacord dependency pulled down. So let's go into the config folder of Java com.example spring.task application.config, and let's create a new config object, and we'll just call it Discord bot config. And we want to give it a component annotation so that Spring Boot will automatically run it. And then what we want to do is use an annotated value of, and you'll see where this comes into play shortly here. So token, Discord token, which is, it will then be assigned to string of token. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to be creating a listener, a Discord bot listener, but first we have to call the Discord API. So we create a Java bean, and we want to return a Discord API object. So what we want, and this is registering the bot. So this is the piece of code that when the server's up and running, it'll communicate with your Discord server, and then the bot will become active again. Or it will become active, not active again. Okay, so Discord API equals new Discord API builder, and then we want to call set token, and we want to give it our token name, and then we want to call set all non-privileged intents, and then we want to log in and join our server. Okay, and then what we want to do is API, we want to add a listener, which will be our task listener, which we will create right now, and then we want to return the API. Okay, so let's now create a package under the root, and we'll just call it listeners, and we'll create a new one called task listener. And basically all we're going to do is listen for a message from the bot, like from the user. Okay, so it'll be another component, and it's going to implements message create listener. Okay, so we want to import that class, and then what we're going to do is we are going to be using AutoWired, and we're going to pull in our task service so that we can create a new tasks as we get commands for it. Okay, and so then what we got to do is, so there's only one override we have to worry about, and it's called onMessageCreate, and we get a message create event argument sent to us from Discord, from the Discord handler. Okay, so first we need to pull out the message. So message create event get message, and then we want to pull out the message content equals message get content. And then what we want to do is we want to check that the bot didn't sometimes the bot can on other task listeners, or not task listeners, on other event listeners in Discord, there might be cases where the bot accidentally triggers sending this message on its own. So we want to sort of account for that. So if message create event get message author, so the sender is bot user, then we want to return. So we don't want to do anything if it's not a human user. A human user. So else if the message content, so that's the string, starts with bang task, so exclamation mark task. So in Discord, when you want to activate any slash commands, for triggering a bot, it's an exclamation mark. So if we detect a exclamation mark task, then what we're going to do is everything after that task word is going to be the description of a new task that we'll create. So let's first parse out that message content. So message content split bang task. Okay, and then what we're going to do is create a new task. We are going to automatically set the status to be the backlog. Okay, let's resolve these just so we can work with them. Okay, and then we want to set the description. So task set description, and then the first element of that content split string array, and then we want to save it. So task service.save task, and then this is where we respond back to the Discord channel. We can say new message builder, and then let's call append, created a new task, and we'll get the ID. And then we shall append some code. We'll use append code to make it look like a block, and we'll call it. We'll return back the same description that we got. So task get description, and then we'll enter a new line to move to the next line, and then we'll add the status. And then once we're done all that, we're gonna, then we're gonna call, or then we're gonna end this with send to the channel. So the channel that the message came from. Okay. So you'll notice, remember here, that at the top or in the Discord bot config, we've got a token here of now we need to add auto wired, and then task listener. That way we can reference it. Okay, and then so notice how this value is this $sign squiggly Discord token. So this is a special syntax to reference our application properties. So in our application properties, we should be having a property here called Discord token. Now, remember what I was saying is that never put tokens into these files that get committed into your source control. So again, we're going to use another env parameter here and call it just Discord_token. And then I'm going to put some verbiage here to make sure that you don't check it in by accident, or you don't put in your Discord token here by accident. So in your .env file, let's create a Discord token. And where do we pull that Discord token from? Is if you go back to your Discord bot page, if you click the reset token button, it'll say, well, it'll give you a warning that your bot will stop working until you update the token in your bot's code. So hit click yes, and it'll come back with this big string of text. So what you need to do is then put that into the .env file there as the Discord token. So it's going to be different for every one of us, and like it's going to be different for you when you create it on your own Discord bot app. But now when we run this, what should happen, unless I've forgotten an important piece here, is that it should then start up and then automatically register itself with Discord. Oh, that spooks me out every time. Okay, so everything kind of looks okay. So let's go back to Discord. And we've got our Spring Task bot is now showing as online, which is great. And so let's do a bang task. And then so everything after task, after the space here, is what's used in the description. So let's creating a new Discord bot. Okay, and then we see a response from the bot. Created a new task, ID 12. Description, creating a new Discord bot, status, backlog. And then if we go back to our, we now see our new ID, creating a new Discord bot. So we've used the same API that we're referencing from our JavaScript as we do it from our Discord bot, which is very, very, very cool. I think that's really interesting. That is it for me for this video. we were able to, oh wait, let's go back to we have to go back to the Trello board and ceremoniously move our Discord pieces over from doing to done. I wish there was like confetti or something that comes up when you completed all of your tasks. Anyway, we've completed our whole board, and that's a sign that we are approaching the end of the video. So I just wanted to say thank you for watching this far. If you liked what you saw, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel. If you didn't like what you saw, then I really want to thank you for watching this far anyways. My name is Wazoo, and I really hope you have a good evening or day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you next time. Peace, everyone.